After taking care of the paralyzed CEO for 2 years, he finally recovered. The first thing he did was propose to the goddess who had abandoned him back then. The media called it a love story of unwavering devotion, finally coming to fruition. I tilted my head up, watching the live broadcast of the proposal on the giant screen in the square, remaining silent as I tossed the ring in my pocket into the trash bin. The debt I owed him was finally repaid. The crowd in the pedestrian street came to a halt, their eyes drawn to the massive outdoor screen playing the live broadcast of the proposal. It wasn't just here. Every screen across a city capable of broadcasting had been switched to the same proposal stream. The image was crystal clear. Even the glimmer of tears in the heroine's eyes was visible. The entire setup was unmistakably Oscar's handiwork. During the final months of his recovery, he had meticulously sketched out this scene, even personally overseeing the design of the fireworks. Back then, he had held the back of my neck, his fingertips icy cold, and asked what flowers I liked. I had said hyacinths, but the grand proposal on the screen was enveloped in a sea of fiery red roses. And the woman standing at the center of it all wasn't me. It was Oscar's ex-girlfriend, the famous designer, Jessica. I gazed up calmly. The proposal had reached the moment where Oscar Liu knelt on one knee, the diamond in the black velvet box sparkling like a star. Compared to that, the ring in my pocket hardly deserved to be called one. The girls beside me squealed in excitement. Oscar Liu, CEO of the Liu Corporation. Damn. That slicked back hair is killing me. No wonder he used to be called the biggest playboy in a city. Guess the playboy has finally fallen. I heard Jessica gave up everything to take care of him during his 2 years of paralysis. What a fairy tale romance. Meant to be together. I silently clenched my wrist, feeling the rough scars left behind from those 2 years of caring for Oscar. At that time, Jessica had already broken up with Oscar and had gone to Milan for further studies. The crowd collectively held their breath as the proposal reached its climax. Jessica lowered her head, looking at the young man kneeling before her, her voice trembling. I do. As the ring slid onto her finger, Oscar stood up and kissed her. At that moment, fireworks exploded across the night sky of a city with such grandeur. It wasn't just a city, probably. The whole country knew about it. But that made sense. That was just the kind of person Oscar was. When he loved someone, he wanted the whole world to know. The crowd erupted into cheers. The girl next to me, overwhelmed with excitement, grabbed my wrist and squeezed it hard. They're perfect for each other. Don't you think? I endured the pain in my wrist and forced a smile. Yeah, perfect. She noticed my pale face and let go, realizing her mistake. She was about to apologize, but I had already turned around and walked away amidst the celebratory noise. Behind me, the two protagonists on the screen were locked in a passionate kiss. The crowd screamed and cheered for their love, fireworks painting the sky with dazzling colors. I suddenly stopped beside a trash bin, squatting down to catch my breath. I slowly straightened up again. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a dull, oversized ring. It wasn't pretty, nor did it fit well. Fortunately, I had no reason to keep it anymore. I dropped it into the trash bin, feeling an unprecedented sense of calm. Not a single tear fell. From this moment on, everything I owed the Liu family, everything I owed Oscar Liu, was repaid in full. I was kicked out of Liu Corporation. I used to have my own office. But now, forget about an office, I didn't even have a desk. The HR department handed me a cardboard box. Special assistant. All your belongings are in here. I had a decent reputation in the company. So she lowered her voice and added, President Liu personally ordered you to leave. You'll get your severance package. So just go. She was being polite. I could guess what Oscar's actual words had been, probably telling me to get lost. Leaning back in his chair with that lazy, indifferent air of his, as if I were nothing to him. Struggling to hold the box, I passed by what used to be my office, and finally saw who its new occupant was. It had been turned into Jessica's lounge, with scattered design drafts lying around casually. Their intimate photos together covered what was once a tightly packed schedule. of meetings and appointments. I lowered my eyes, my knuckles turning briefly pale from gripping the edge of the box too tightly. But I quickly let go. Forget it. At the entrance of the company, I got shoved and fell to the ground. The box tipped over, and my belongings spilled everywhere. There were too many people gathered here. A stiletto heel stepped on the back of my hand, sending a sharp pain shooting through me. The crowd of reporters and onlookers surged in one direction. I gritted my teeth against the pain and lifted my head just in time to see Jessica stepping out, arm in arm with Oscar. She loved red. With her black hair and crimson dress, she was impossible to miss. But the man beside her shone even brighter. Oscar didn't like big crowds. He looked slightly annoyed, turning his head away. But he still carefully shielded Jessica in his embrace. The reporters swarmed her, shoving microphones in her direction, bombarding her with questions. Jessica. The grand proposal has been trending at #1 online for a whole week. As the leading lady, how do you feel? Jessica smiled radiantly. I feel so lucky that during the 2 most difficult years of his life, I was the one by his side. Oscar had lived a life of smooth sailing, standing at the peak of success. Only after his car accident and subsequent paralysis did he taste betrayal, abandonment, and the cold indifference of the world. Of all people, Jessica had the least right to say those words. Back then, she had left without hesitation, flying straight to Milan. The only person who had stayed was me. Oscar listened to her lie without refuting it. In fact, he seemed quite pleased, even indulging her. Lowering his gaze, he looked at Jessica with tenderness in his eyes, like a wildfire raging across the land. Finally reaching the river and coming to a halt, the flash of cameras flickered wildly as the entertainment reporters eagerly captured this moment of deep affection between them. Then, suddenly, Oscar turned his head, his gaze cutting through the crowd, locking onto mine. His eyes were almost icy. I met his stare in silence, offering a faint, relaxed smile. His brows instinctively furrowed. The truth was, I also felt lucky. For those 2 difficult years of his life, I had been the one by his side. And now, every debt had been repaid. The taxi I was waiting for never came. My blood sugar was low, and my stomach ached. Pressing a hand to my abdomen, I crouched down by the roadside. The hand that had been stepped on earlier was now swollen and bleeding, throbbing with pain. Jessica really was special to Oscar. I had known Oscar for a long time. Since childhood, he had been the heir to the Liu family, growing up surrounded by endless scandals. But the only girlfriend he had ever publicly acknowledged was Jessica. A rekindled romance was only natural. A sudden honk startled me. I instinctively looked up to see a sleek black car stopping right in front of me. The window rolled down, revealing Oscar's indifferent face. His fingers drummed lazily against the steering wheel. Stomachache again. My eyelashes trembled slightly. He let out a short, mocking laugh, his gaze laced with disdain. Serves you right. I lowered my eyes. It felt like I had been pulled back 2 years. To the way Oscar used to treat me. He had been cruel to me then too. He had once said that someone like me should be grateful just to be alive. Only now did I realize that the tenderness he later showed me had all been an act, just a way to keep me from leaving. Because if I left, there would be no one left to care for him. I no longer had the energy to entertain him. The sound of high heels clicked behind me. Jessica walked around me and slid into the passenger seat, her voice soft and playful. Oscar. I was late. Those reporters wouldn't let me go. I should have had you stay so you could help me deal with them. As she fastened her seatbelt, she turned her head and saw me. Her voice abruptly faltered, and her face paled slightly. She hurriedly urged, Oscar. Let's go. We're running late for the gala. Oscar frowned slightly, almost unconsciously, enduring the pain. I looked up at him, estimating that this would probably be the last time I spoke to him. I watched the engagement broadcast. The scene turned out even better than the sketches you originally drew. Except for the absence of hyacinths, everything was perfect. After a brief pause, I added, I wish you both a lifetime of happiness. Oscar's smirk vanished. The hand resting on the car window suddenly clenched, veins showing beneath his skin, as if what he had heard wasn't a blessing at all. A wedding band gleamed on his finger. I lowered my eyes, missing the look he gave me. Jessica hesitated for a moment before gently saying, "Oscar, it's late. Let's not waste time on irrelevant people." A soft, indifferent voice drifted down to me. Oscar said, "Helen, don't regret this." He waited for a response. When none came, he let out a cold chuckle, restarted the engine, and stepped on the gas. I looked up blankly, only catching a glimpse of the black car disappearing into the distance. It reminded me of how he used to drive sports cars recklessly. The way he used to be. Even a blessing from me was enough to make Oscar irrationally angry. He was ridiculous. But I had no regrets. The taxi still hadn't arrived. And I had almost resigned myself to waiting when my phone suddenly buzzed. A short message popped up. "Where are you?" I hesitated for a moment before sending my location. Half an hour later, I sat stiffly inside a business-class car, my injured hand stretched out awkwardly. Across from me, a young man sat with his head lowered, carefully treating my wound. Gideon lifted his gaze. "Does it hurt?" At his touch, I instinctively tensed, sitting ramrod straight. I shook my head. Gideon exhaled lightly over my wound, his breath cool against my skin. My fingers curled slightly as I widened my eyes and repeated, "I said it doesn't hurt." He finally let go of my hand, his tone slow and casual. "Didn't hear that." I suddenly felt like a traitorous official conspiring with an enemy. After all, I had been Oscar's shadow for years. And if Oscar had fought 10 times, then at least 11 of those fights had been against Gideon. From schoolyard brawls to corporate battles, they had always been sworn rivals. Especially in the 2 years Oscar had been paralyzed, Gideon had nearly swallowed up all of his business. Even though Oscar and I were nothing to each other now, old habits died hard. Gideon leaned back lazily. "There's a gala tonight. I need a +1. I kept my gaze down, my wound now bandaged. "Will Oscar be there?" Gideon hummed in confirmation. I didn't look at him, my voice quiet after a long pause. "If you're planning to use me to get at Oscar, you'll be disappointed. He doesn't care about me." It was a simple statement of fact. Gideon absent-mindedly toyed with a lighter. A flicker of fire briefly illuminated his fingers before he said, "That's not necessarily true." I turned to look out the window, watching the city blur past, and let out a small laugh. I suddenly thought of Oscar when he was 17, surrounded by friends. He had laughed recklessly, his voice dripping with scorn. "Helen. I could never like Helen." Gideon stayed with me the entire time, as I was styled and fitted for dresses. His standards were high after trying on more than a dozen haute couture gowns. He remained dissatisfied. Truthfully, I had no desire to attend that gala. But when Gideon made a request, I had no choice. Half a month ago, when I left the Liu family, I wasn't allowed to take anything with me. It was the matriarch of the Law family who temporarily took me in. So whatever Gideon Law wanted, I would do my best to comply. When I tried on a silver-white gown, the fabric flowing like a river of stars, Gideon's gaze finally halted. His Adam's apple bobbed slightly. "This one," he said. I turned to the mirror and froze. The reflection staring back at me was both unfamiliar and eerily familiar. So beautiful it was almost dizzying. Like the quiet girl who had always stood behind Oscar. Her presence muted suddenly, becoming the center of attention. This was a version of myself I had never seen before. I reached out, carefully touching the cold surface of the mirror. Gideon stepped behind me, letting a necklace slip through his fingers. Tilting his head slightly, he fastened it around my neck, his breath warm against my skin. His voice was casual yet deep. "Helen, I'm not sending you there to provoke them. I just want Oscar to realize he's not just a cripple. He's blind too." This was my first time attending a high-profile business gala. After spending years by Oscar's side, I had grown used to the fact that I was never the woman on his arm. Gideon and I arrived fashionably late, just before stepping into the grand hall. I tilted my head up to look at him. The lights illuminated his sharp jawline in an instant, making him appear almost dazzling. Soft gasps rippled through the crowd. Who's that girl with President Law? They look so good together. Isn't President Law known for never bringing a date? A man who was familiar with Oscar squinted at me for a long moment before suddenly swearing under his breath. Holy shit. Isn't that Oscar's plain little assistant? The words had barely landed when I heard the sound of a wine glass shattering. I followed the noise. Not far away, Oscar stood frozen. His grip loosened around his wine glass, letting it crash to the floor. The red wine splattered across Jessica's long dress, and she let out a soft, startled scream. But he didn't seem to hear her. He just stared at me, as if seeing me for the first time, dazed, caught off guard. This version of me was someone unfamiliar to him. And, for the first time, he found me breathtaking. Jessica lifted her head, looking at me for several seconds, before recognition finally dawned. Her expression was filled with disbelief. I nodded at her politely, then turned my attention back to Gideon, focusing on our small talk with the other guests. Only then did Oscar seem to notice that I wasn't alone. His usual flirtatious eyes darkened, the warmth draining inch by inch as he strode toward me. Without hesitation, he reached out to pull me toward him. Gideon was quicker. He blocked Oscar's hand effortlessly, adjusting his grip on my arm, subtly shielding me behind him. Oscar's gaze pierced through Gideon and landed on me. Helen. Come here. I had never once stood on someone else's side in front of him. Never once had I hidden behind another man. Every time he called my name, no matter how far away I was, I would always run to him. But this time, things were different. I didn't take a single step forward. Instead, I met his eyes, my voice as calm and gentle as it had always been. I've done enough for you. For so many years. A warm midsummer breeze drifted in through the open windows. Oscar. We have nothing to do with each other anymore. His face turned deathly pale in an instant. Midsummer is a season of encounters. I was one of the children sponsored by the Liu family. Not just me after the earthquake. The entire county was rebuilt, with the help of Oscar's mother. But my first time visiting the Liu family estate was when I was 15. That year, I was the top student in my county's high school entrance exam, and I traveled with the county officials, carrying local specialties, to express gratitude to Mrs. Liu. Mrs. Liu was just as gentle as I had imagined. She discussed future development plans with the adults, answering countless phone calls in between, looking incredibly busy, standing quietly at the side. I caught sight of a framed photo on her desk. The boy in the photo was about my age, his features strikingly delicate. He stared at the camera with evident impatience, rebellious like a young prince. A sudden knock interrupted the moment. The butler entered with a troubled expression. Madam, the young master has gone street racing again. Mrs. Liu was too busy to be surprised. She merely nodded absent-mindedly. Bring him back. The butler hesitated, clearly finding the task difficult. One of the county officials suddenly nudged me forward with an awkward laugh. Mrs. Liu, why not let Cece go with them? She gets along well with people her age. Only then did Mrs. Liu's gaze fall on me. I curled my fingers slightly, before mustering the courage to nod. I can do it. Even if I couldn't, I had to. Following the butler, I arrived at the winding mountain roads where Oscar was racing. At 17, he was already tall and commanding, his black and red motorcycle slicing through the wind. He only braked when he was right in front of me, removing his helmet with a flick of his fingers. His sharp, narrow eyes glanced at me lazily. Country bumpkin. Who the hell are you? I shut my eyes for a moment, my face pale. For a second, I had thought I was going to die. Regaining my breath, I said, I'm Helen. He raised an eyebrow, amused. My second sentence, Mrs. Liu asked me to bring you back. His expression immediately darkened. Oscar wasn't the type to listen to anyone, but I was stubborn too. If he didn't leave, I wouldn't either. So I stood by the roadside, waiting. The first time he circled back, I was still there. The second time, I remained. By the third lap, perhaps feeling a bit embarrassed. He huffed in annoyance, dumped his bike, and wordlessly walked off with me trailing behind. I followed him, feeling how tall he was. The midsummer breeze swept past. I found myself repeating his name in my mind. Oscar. Mrs. Liu had wanted someone around his age to keep an eye on him. So she kept me at the Liu estate, assigning me as Oscar's personal shadow to ensure he didn't get into trouble. At that age, he was deep in his rebellious phase. So he loathed me instantly, thinking I was nothing more than his mother's spy. He made sure to torment me every chance he got. But no matter how many times I wiped my tears, I still followed him. Eventually, he stopped caring. In his words, "You're annoying as hell." Everyone knew that despite Oscar's countless romantic flings, there was always a quiet, plain-looking girl following behind him. She barely existed in the spotlight, only stepping in when he was on the verge of crossing a line. I studied hard, met every expectation Mrs. Liu set for me, and stayed by Oscar's side. 7. Almost 8 years. All while hiding a secret. The year I took my college entrance exams, I stood under a jacaranda tree. Oscar leaned against the courtyard railing. His voice was light, casual, but it clenched around my heart, ripping my secret apart. "You like me?" I froze, unable to move for what felt like an eternity. A jacaranda blossom drifted onto my shoulder. My voice finally emerged, hoarse and fragile. "Yes. I like you." Oscar chuckled, turned around, and walked away. That night, I went to find him. The moment I pushed open the VIP lounge door, I heard the young heir of the Liu family lounging against the sofa, laughing recklessly. His voice wasn't loud, but it might as well have been a thunderclap. Not just my ears, every part of me hurt. Who the hell would like Helen? I like girls like Jessica. That was the first time I heard Jessica's name. I was 2 years younger than Oscar. I had even skipped a grade in high school, just to attend the same university as him. But in that moment, I realized, some distances can't be closed with effort alone. 15-year-old Helen, meeting Oscar for the first time, would never have imagined that after so many years, our relationship would still be this bad. Not even at someone else's gala could we avoid a scene. Especially since this was Oscar's first public event after his recovery. He and Gideon had never gotten along. And the moment they stepped into the same space, the tension was palpable. Now that they were openly confronting each other, the entire hall was subtly watching, enjoying the show. I gently tugged on Gideon's sleeve and whispered, "Let's go." Oscar's eyelashes trembled. I avoided his gaze. For the first time in all these years, he heard me say "let's go" not to him, but to someone else. And in his presence, we walked quite a distance. Before I turned back for a quick glance, Oscar was still standing there, his head lowered, frozen in place. It reminded me of when he first woke up after the accident, fragile and cold. Back then, his mother, Mrs. Liu, who had been in the same car crash, was already gone. Jessica lifted her gown, hesitating before reaching out to touch him. But just as her fingers neared, he looked up. She stopped dead in her tracks, frightened by what she saw in his eyes. I smiled. Gideon raised an eyebrow. "What's funny?" I spoke softly. "I just realized not everyone can do it. Not everyone could endure Oscar's suffocating moods and entitled arrogance. Not everyone, after seeing his worst side, would still choose to stay. Especially during the time he was paralyzed. Oscar, born a golden child, could never accept that he had become disabled." He stopped smiling. The fire in him extinguished. And to make matters worse, his only family, Mrs. Liu, had died in that accident. Oscar had no will to live. He attempted suicide more than once. One night, I shattered a glass, picked up a shard, and pressed it against my own wrist. "If you want to die, fine," I told him. "I'll go with you." Oscar had never seen me that way before, so ruthless, so desperate. His dark eyes locked onto mine for a long time before he gritted his teeth and swore, "Helen, I'll get better." From then on, he cooperated with the doctors. 2 years later, he stood up again. And then, he discarded his wheelchair. After the gala, I returned to the Law family estate with Gideon. I was still staying there, thanks to the old matriarch's generosity. But I was actively preparing my resume and planned to move out once I found a job. In truth, Gideon and I weren't close. The only times we had ever crossed paths were after he and Oscar got into a fight, and I had to go to the Law house to apologize on Oscar's behalf. The Law matriarch always welcomed me warmly, waving a fan as she chuckled. "Ah, it's nothing. Boys fight. Come, little girl. Sit for a while." I would sit stiffly for an entire afternoon, watching her apply ointment to Gideon's bruises under the golden sunlight, feeling more and more uneasy. I never expected that when I fell on hard times, it would be the Law family that extended a hand to me. Gideon and I weren't talkative people, so the car ride back was unusually quiet. I sat like an overly disciplined student, back straight, hands in my lap, eyes fixed forward. But when I glanced up, I caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked tired, his long eyelashes casting shadows over his face. For a brief moment, neon lights flashed across his features. Then he opened his eyes, immediately catching me staring at him. It was slightly awkward, but not unbearably so. I looked away in silence. Gideon suddenly chuckled. "Helen, do you know what I thought when I first saw you?" How could I forget? He had shouted it in front of Oscar. I nodded. "You asked if I was blind because otherwise, why would I follow Oscar around?" That comment had infuriated Oscar enough to start yet another fight. Gideon shook his head and closed his eyes again. The cityscape blurred past outside the window, the streets alive with motion. The silence in the car stretched so long that I thought he had fallen asleep. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, Gideon murmured, "I thought, how can someone be this obedient? Midsummer is a season for encounters." It had been a long time since I last visited Mrs. Liu. I brought a bouquet of white flowers to the cemetery. Not long after Oscar took over Liu Corporation, a runaway truck had crashed into the Liu family's car. One life lost, one severely injured. She had been a kind woman. If not for her, I wouldn't even know where I'd be today. I cleared the weeds around her grave, speaking to her softly. "Mrs. Liu, the charities you cared about are still running well. They've expanded, and the foundation now receives so many thank you letters that an entire room can't hold them all." I lowered my gaze, watching a single dewdrop tremble on the petals. "Oscar has recovered. He's back to how he was before. Liu Corporation is thriving again. He recently got engaged. The media made a huge spectacle out of it. They called it the proposal of the century. You know the bride-to-be, Jessica, the girl Oscar once brought home. Their relationship is strong. Everything is going in the right direction. Everything except me. All these years, I remained frozen in place, directionless." The woman in the framed photo on the tombstone looked serene, as if she were truly listening. I reached out and touched the cold surface. "I resigned from Liu Corporation. Would you blame me?" Of course. There was no answer. The cemetery was silent. Death had no sound. I covered my face, and through the gaps in my fingers, tears seeped through. Apart from the very beginning, I had never truly been happy here. Sometimes I wondered if I hadn't been the top scorer in my county's high school entrance exam, maybe I wouldn't have ended up here at all. I wept quietly for a while, before gathering my things to leave. As I stood up, I noticed someone standing a short distance away. I didn't know how long he had been watching. I lowered my eyes. There was only one path out of the cemetery, and it led past him. Oscar must have come to see Mrs. Liu as well, just bad timing, forcing us into an encounter. As I brushed past him, he spoke, "Crying at my mom's grave. You." He hadn't even finished his mocking remark before I turned to look at him. My eyes were still wet, a tear clinging to the corner but refusing to fall. Oscar swallowed the rest of his words. The truth was, our relationship had never been this bad. There had only been 2 times when he treated me like this. Once, when I secretly applied for jobs behind his back, tired of being his assistant. He found out and exploded with rage. And the second time, just before he kicked me out of the Liu estate. One before the accident, one after. 2 years apart. But I wasn't as devastated as I had been back then. I simply looked at him. And for the first time, I voiced the question my younger self had always wanted to ask. Oscar, did you really think that just because I never showed emotion in front of you? I never felt anything. Did you truly believe that no matter how recklessly you acted, I would always be 15 years old, always trailing behind you? Oscar pressed his lips together, his dark eyes unreadable. The hand at his side curled and uncurled, before finally clenching into a fist. Then, lips twisting into a mocking smirk, he said, Helen, you will never be able to repay your debt. You killed my mother. And now you want to play the victim. My mind remained hazy. Even after I left, Oscar had looked down at me and tossed one last sentence over his shoulder. That accident was no coincidence. Guess who betrayed the Liu family? A notification popped up in my inbox. My hands trembled as I clicked on it. Inside was a collection of evidence compiled by Oscar's people, proof that the car crash had been orchestrated. Mrs. Liu and Oscar had been on their way to sign a major contract. And their itinerary was supposed to be highly confidential. Except, apparently, it wasn't. Because I had known. I had been Oscar's assistant, raised within the Liu family. They had always trusted me. The email contained a photo and image of me sitting across from someone from a rival corporation. The timestamp was damning. The night before the crash. But the photo was fake. A fabrication. I had never met that person in my life. Yet in Oscar's eyes, I was the only possible traitor. He hadn't even questioned me. Hadn't even given me the chance to defend myself. He had judged me guilty without hesitation. I let out a broken laugh, curling up in my seat. No wonder he had torn up the proposal sketches he had so carefully drawn the day before. And the next day, he had told me to get out. No wonder he would rather go back to Jessica than have anything to do with me. I closed my inbox without replying. Because I knew Oscar wouldn't believe me. And if he had just looked a little further, just investigated beyond this one piece of evidence, he would have seen it. He wasn't the only one who had access to that itinerary. Jessica had, too. I hadn't slept this deeply in a long time. Even before Oscar's accident, I had already started secretly submitting job applications behind his back. Because of Jessica. She was too aggressive. And I was genuinely exhausted. She had been the only official girlfriend Oscar had ever acknowledged. Spoiled to the point of lawlessness. And she absolutely could not stand me. I had dealt with my fair share of Oscar's admirers before. But none had ever gone as far as she did. Can you imagine being publicly humiliated? And called a whore in front of an entire company? Jessica did that to me. It happened during the days when Oscar was away on business. His itinerary kept strictly confidential even from her. She couldn't reach him. But I knew where he was. When she asked, I refused to tell her. When she tried to storm into his office, I blocked her path. Everyone in the company knew that Jessica was Oscar's treasured woman. Yet I was the only one who dared to stand in her way. So she called for an audience gathering. Employees to watch as she slapped me across the face. And she spat out these words. Helen. Even if you stripped naked in front of Oscar, he wouldn't spare you a second glance. Get the hell out of my way. You think clinging to the Liu family is your way out of that pathetic little town you came from? Following Oscar around like this disgusting. No better than a mistress. I had done nothing wrong. Yet, in that moment, under countless gazes, I felt as if I had been stripped bare and left utterly humiliated. She forced her way into Oscar's office. She saw his schedule. The next day, Oscar and Mrs. Liu had their accident. It had never even crossed my mind to suspect Jessica, because both Oscar and Mrs. Liu had adored her. But now I understood. Only those who aren't loved tread carefully, memorizing every bit of kindness shown to them, desperate to return it tenfold. That was me. When I woke up, the world had already changed. The #1 trending topic on Weibo was hashtag a City Liu family car accident conspiracy. People love a good scandal, especially when it involves the elite. Oscar's extravagant proposal had dominated headlines for weeks. Now, an anonymous source had revealed that the accident that nearly took his life had not been an accident at all. It had been a deliberate attack orchestrated by a rival corporation. And the person who leaked his itinerary, his personal assistant at the time, a girl the Liu family had sponsored for years. They even attached an incriminating image of me meeting with someone from a rival company. The same fabricated photo I had found in my inbox. The exposé was written with such certainty, as if the anonymous source had personally witnessed everything. Jessica responded quickly. She was much more tactful now, smiling softly into the camera. Helen. I never liked her. But she was always following Oscar around. I even argued with Oscar about her once. I never imagined she would do something like this. The interview was long, every word subtly painting me as the classic ungrateful villain in a wealthy family drama. And Oscar, he stood beside her, expressionless. I checked the comments. They raised this assistant for years. And she turned out to be a snake. Poor Mrs. Liu. Jessica really suffered. Huh. Imagine dating someone and having to put up with their assistant meddling the whole time. Report her to the police. She shouldn't get away with this. Where is she now? What company would still hire her? Honestly, Jessica and Oscar have been through so much. Their love story is incredible. True soulmates. Someone suddenly snatched the phone from my hands. I looked up. Gideon. He was staring at my pale face. Stop reading. Grandma called for dinner. I opened my mouth, barely whispering. It wasn't me. He didn't even hesitate. I know. Not just empty words. He genuinely believed me. Just as the internet had predicted. Every company that had initially shown interest in hiring me quickly retracted their offers. If I couldn't clear my name, I would be socially dead, forever unemployable. Forever branded as a traitor. That was exactly the ending Oscar wanted for me. Miserable enough. Humiliating enough. To quench his anger. Only the Law family's company was still willing to take me in. I had applied everywhere, including to them. But I declined the offer. Gideon flipped through my resume without looking at me and asked. Why? I shook my head. My reputation is ruined. Wherever I go, I'll bring controversy. It's bad for the Law family. Gideon turned his head slightly, studying me for a long moment, before letting out a helpless laugh. Helen. You're really slow. Slow. I blinked, confused. But before I could respond, the police arrived to take me away. The Liu family had officially filed a report as a suspect in the case from years ago. I was required to undergo interrogation. Before I entered the station, I saw Oscar and Jessica. Their expressions were both interesting. Jessica's had the desperation of a gambler going all in. And I understood why she had covered her tracks well over the past 2 years. If there had been any evidence, it was long gone. The only obstacle left between her and Oscar was me. Once I was in prison, she could finally breathe easy. The fairy tale proposal would be real. The upcoming wedding of the century would be hers. She would be the envy of the world, the proud Mrs. Liu. Oscar, meanwhile, looked more complicated. His jaw was tight, his hand unconsciously rubbing, his fingertips slightly trembling. He glanced at me once before turning away, eyes rimmed with red. I averted my gaze and entered the interrogation room. 4 hours. The police scrutinized every detail of my life. Beyond the fabricated photo, more evidence had surfaced, pieces fitting together too perfectly, like a net cast to ensnare me completely. I was temporarily detained. It wasn't for long, just 10 days. But because the Liu family's accident had gained massive attention online, conspiracy theories ran rampant. The authorities took the case seriously, pouring significant resources into the investigation to ensure fairness, justice, and that no detail was overlooked. During those 10 days, I didn't think about much. I hadn't slept so well in years. On the 10th day, the case was solved. I was declared innocent. The real culprits included not only the rival corporation that orchestrated the attack but also Jessica. Justice is slow, but it never forgets. The police cleared my name. The moment I stepped out of the station, I was immediately blinded by flashing cameras. Dozens of reporters had been waiting, ready to pounce. Microphones were shoved into my face. Questions firing rapidly. Helen. What are your thoughts on Jessica being the real traitor? Helen. All these years by Oscar's side, was it because you loved him? Helen. When Oscar was paralyzed, Jessica wasn't the one taking care of him. So who was? Was it you? The pressure was suffocating. Just as I was about to crumble, a hand pulled me out of the chaos. Gideon shoved a bouquet of rue flowers into my arms, shielding me as he led me into the car. As the doors shut, I turned back. Amidst the flashing lights and frenzy, I spotted Oscar. He stood at a distance, exhausted, hollow, broken. I answered the reporter's final question. Softly. I said, "No. It wasn't me. I had given up on him. A long, long time ago. Too much had happened in 10 days. At first, the internet had been out for blood, calling for my execution. But then the truth unraveled. Piece by piece. The first spark came when someone dug up photos of Jessica's studies in Milan, exposing the fact that she had abandoned Oscar the moment he was in trouble. While she had been enjoying her life, he had been suffering alone. Their so-called fairy tale romance was nothing more than an illusion spun from lies. Public sentiment quickly turned. The second revelation came when an old video surfaced. A crystal-clear clip of Jessica slapping me in front of the entire company. It showed everything: her humiliating me, calling me names, sneering as she knocked me to the ground. The woman the internet once adored for her grace and kindness now appeared monstrous. Her carefully curated image shattered instantly. Jessica had been a rising star in the corporate world, a role model. Now, she couldn't even pick up her phone without facing relentless backlash. More and more information surfaced, blurring the lines between fact and fiction, until the police announcement came. I was innocent. Jessica was on the run. No headline carried more weight than that. The companies that had previously rejected me scrambled to contact me again. I turned them all down. Even the Law family. I had no intention of going anywhere near them either. I received a call from home. My old middle school principal, a woman as respectable as Mrs. Liu, asked if I would return to teach, to help with the county's education development. I agreed. I made one last trip to the Liu estate. This time, no one could stop me. The belongings I had left behind remained untouched. I had expected dust to cover everything. But when I opened the door, the room was spotless. Sunlight streamed in, casting a glow over freshly folded flowers on the desk. I packed quickly. When I opened the drawer, I hesitated for a moment. Then, from a hidden compartment, I pulled out an old photograph. It had been taken with an older camera, a young man, full of life, the evening wind ruffling his hair. He was walking ahead with his friends, laughing. But for some reason, he turned back, as if checking whether the person behind him was still following. 17-year-old Oscar. A photo I had secretly taken. Back then, I had thought, no one can catch the midsummer wind. But I could capture it. I left the photo on the desk. Whether Oscar chose to keep it or throw it away, that was up to him. Outside, the jacaranda tree was in full bloom, its delicate flowers cascading gently. I stood for a moment, admiring it. Behind me, Oscar called my name softly. Helen. As if afraid of waking from a dream. I turned to him and smiled. Oscar looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes. His jaw covered in faint stubble. That once unshakable arrogance had vanished entirely. For the first time, the Liu family's golden prince looked hesitant, almost fragile. His eyelashes trembled as he spoke, his voice hoarse. I started investigating the accident as soon as I began recovering. But when I found traces leading to you, I couldn't keep going. Just the thought of it, the evidence, it hurt to breathe. I had never even considered that you might betray me. And once that thought took root, I couldn't stop it. He let out a bitter laugh. You understand, don't you? People like us, we get betrayed all the time. We're used to knives in our backs. But when it was you, he clenched his jaw. I couldn't take it. When I looked at those files, all I could think was I would rather have died in that accident. His voice dropped lower. I lost control. I made mistake after mistake. That so-called proposal, it was all for you to see. He kept talking, trying to explain himself. But I only looked at him, eyes clear, and interrupted softly. No. Oscar froze. I smiled faintly. When you did all those things, you already knew you were wrong. But you thought it didn't matter. You thought it wasn't important whether my betrayal was real or not. Whether you were right or wrong, because no matter what you did to me, I would always forgive you. The truth was, if Oscar had never been paralyzed, if everyone around him hadn't abandoned him, he never would have noticed me. His eyes had always been on women like Jessica. Even the ring he gave me had never fit. For a long time, there was only silence. I thought it was the shadow of the flowers falling to the ground. But it was Oscar's tears. His fingers wrapped around my wrist. Desperate. I'm a bastard, he whispered. One last time, can you forgive me? The jacaranda blossoms swayed, dappling sunlight across the courtyard. I thought back to when I was 17. Oscar had leaned lazily against the railing, grinning as he asked me, Helen, do you like me? But now, I pried his fingers off my wrist. I won't forgive you. His eyes fell to the scars on my wrist, and his pupils shrank in horror. His lips parted, trembling, but no words came out. I spoke to him like one would to a lost child. Oscar, your mother saved you in that accident. You need to live well. Lu Corporation was her legacy. Take care of it properly. I'm leaving. Oscar turned deathly pale. For the first time in his life, he felt hollow, truly, irreversibly empty. Someone who had always been there was leaving him forever. The midsummer wind never looks back. A city had been thrown into chaos. The once celebrated stars of the proposal of the century. One had become a disgrace. The other, a criminal. Jessica had committed the crime, but Oscar had been her accomplice. Lu Corporation's stock plummeted. For reasons unknown, Oscar crashed his car, shattering his leg. He was back in a wheelchair. On my bus ride back to the county, I received a message from him. I will repay everything I owe you. I didn't care. I blocked his number. Leaning against the window, I watched the scenery blur past, shaking and familiar. Just like the first time I had come here. In the reflection of the glass, I saw the man beside me. Gideon. He seemed to like sleeping. Even now. He was resting. His head tilted back. Eyes closed. A corporate CEO. Yet he had insisted on personally delivering school supplies for the donation. Even squeezing into a crowded bus with me. I had tried to stop him. But he had come anyway. The bus jolted. His head leaned against my shoulder. Still. He didn't wake. I pressed my lips together and smiled, looking ahead at the ever-changing landscapes. For the first time, I was certain I was about to step into the midsummer of my own future.